Good afternoon, everyone. I know that some people are still joining, but of course we're at 2 o'clock and we would like to begin. So let me welcome you to our webinar where we want to share some ideas on timetabling. I'm Basil Manuel, the Executive Director of NAPTOSA. Of course, I think it would be safe to say that everybody is experiencing the unusual times we're living in. We've heard that over and over again, so we're not surprised by it. But there is a sense of normality that we need to bring to schooling. Unfortunately, it is not normal. And we've got a plan for the abnormality that comes with where we are at now. So schools are set to bring back grade 10s and 11s together with the grade 12s on the 6th of July. And depending on the type of school you're in, that may be 60%, it may even be a little less, it may be even 50% of your entire cohort of learners in the secondary school. If you are in a combined school, of course, it's a little more complicated than that, in that you will be bringing in primary school children as well as high school children. And this is the array of membership that we have in NAPTOSA. They stretch from all types of schools, rural, urban, and peri-urban schools with very, very different circumstances. Today, we've put together a team of people. I will introduce shortly to you Stephen Price and Anand Gounden, who are going to be our presenters today, together with Dr. Marion Joseph, who is going to talk to us a little bit about assessment, because we can't do timetabling outside of the assessment framework. But we also have with us David Miller and Therona Mutli, who are PCOs, Provincial Chief Executive Officers of NAPTOSA, in the Western Cape and in KZN respectively. And before we continue, I want to just thank them for having agreed to participate. A little bit about Stephen, first of all. Stephen is the principal of Bergvliet High School, and that is in the southern suburbs of Cape Town. And he's been at Bergvliet since 2005, initially as a deputy and then, of course, as a principal. And he comes with a vast amount of experience, particularly with, besides running the school and besides timetabling, the use of the integrated whiteboard. And of course, he's been very, very involved in training teachers. And hence our pouncing on him to say, please come to the party and assist us with this. He calls himself simply a principal. Now that is, of course, an understatement. Nobody is simply a principal. Anand Gounden, being our second presenter, is from KZN, where it's allegedly warmer, but I must tell you in Pietermaritzburg, where he's from, it's not. Anand is a deputy principal at Northbury Park Secondary, and is also the chairman of our Pietermaritzburg Richmond branch in NAPTOSA. And he comes with many years of experience as well, and he comes from a different type of school, and he will demonstrate what they see as one of the possible ways in which we can deal with this. And then, of course, we have Marion Joseph. Dr. Marion Joseph is an executive officer in the NAPTOSA office in Gauteng. And she is the one person that has been keeping us on course with issues of assessment and curriculum-bound issues. Many, many circulars that have come to your schools have been of her doing, of her writing, of her input. And of course, she keeps the DBE, or she tries to keep them on the straight and narrow, even though we have very, very different views at times about things like assessment and the curriculum. Marion is an external examiner for the first and fourth year B.Ed students at WITS for the past 5 years. And of course, she has lectured in teaching methodology, and she has an array of experience in all grades, from the foundation phase right up to matric. And so we have a powerful team with us this afternoon. A little word or two about David Miller and Therona. David has a lot of experience, having been a principal himself, having been a district director, having been now appointed into the NAPTOSA offices in the Western Cape. but he is going to be our moderator of the questions. We've received hundreds of questions from our members who are joining us this afternoon, and our numbers are growing because we have almost 200 people who had signed up. But David is going to manage that, and a lot of those questions may be answered before we even get to David. Therona is going to manage the Q&A. Now, if you look on your screens, you will see that there's a Q&A and there is a chat. The chat is for chatting. The Q&A is where you will ask your questions on the presentations being made by either Stephen or Anand or Marion as their time comes around. And those are the questions that Therona will be throwing at Stephen or Anand or Marion, as the case may be. So please relax, and I hope that everybody will leave today having learned something more and even shared something that we can all use. The idea is to assist one another, not to present a complete fait accompli. Before I start the session, I need to tell you where it is grounded. First of all, it's grounded in the Government Gazette. I'm not even going to quote the number. It's of no value. Everybody knows the Government Gazette that has dictated that schools will bring in learners at a particular time, etc. And of course, there are exceptions too. But there are two important sections in the Government Gazette. Section 10, which stipulates social distancing. And as unions, we've been very, very fixed about this. The non-pharmaceutical interventions are the most important in a school, be they the masks or the social distancing, the hand washing, and so on. Those are the things that will separate us from having an implosion of the entire system. Then, of course, 10.2 or 10.2 of the Gazette talks to the maximum capacity that you can have at the school. Unless it's a very small school with a lot of space, you are limited to a 50% capacity. Now, 10.3 of the same Gazette describes the various timetabling models that can be used to ensure that we stick to the 50% guideline. Now, all these are good and well, but then they don't suspend any of the other regulations that are there. And we know there are regulations in the PUM. And we have tried to guide schools to please look at the PUM because we don't want labor issues arising. And the guidance about the PUM is simply this. Remember that the school day has a particular limit of a 7-hour day. That doesn't mean it can't be changed, but what it means is that it has to happen in consultation with or through the ELRC. The ELRC process hasn't happened. There's been no such process. But if there is a decision to adopt a particular methodology which would extend the school day, it can only be with the acquiescence of the players on that premises and not one foisted on them. And we are saying to you, these are important directives that we have, and we need to look at them very carefully. So now I want to hand over, first of all, to Stephen. And when Stephen is done, I will call on Anand, and then we will have the question and answer session, and then we will call on Marion. So over to Stephen. Stephen, good luck. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Basil. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Stephen Price. I'm the principal of Berkeley High School here in Cape Town. I do have the sound on. All right, so I'd like to preface my presentation by saying that we have a particular model here at Berkeley High School, and in doing that, it will apply to our school, and hopefully as we're going through, you will see whether it can apply to your school in a similar way. So, Michelle, if you could put up that first slide for me. Folks, what I've done is I've kept I've got 6 slides, and they are very simple in their execution. So I want you to understand that the basic concept of your current timetable, I haven't put it up on the screen there, doesn't exist anymore. You can't operate on your the same timetable that you've been operating in prior to the COVID lockdowns. It doesn't work very easily. And then the notion of a teacher saying, this is my classroom, this is my register class, or whatever you call it in your school, and my subject class, those will disappear and have disappeared as we enter into this new timetable. Already that has changed in my school. Teachers are not in their own classrooms. They're in classrooms managing a group of learners. It is not their register class, because their register class has been split into two. It's not their subject class, because some teachers are staying at home through comorbidities. And what we have done is we've merged classes into other teachers' classes. So all of that, those concepts will disappear. And if you haven't worked it out yet, then I think you need to start getting that message across to your staff. That number one, the timetable needs to be redone pretty much from scratch. Your classroom, your register class, and your subject class are going to be different. And that's going to increase as more staff go into isolation and as we get more learners at school. Next slide. So this is our current scenario at Bergfleet High School right now. We have one grade at the moment, that is the grade 12s. That is approximately 20% of our campus. We have 210 matrics in 7 register classes. That gives us 30 in a class. And the split is now 14 register classes where we have 15 per class. They're at school daily from Monday to Friday from 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, they start coming to school from 7 o'clock. We have all my teachers are on campus before 7 o'clock. They're in the classrooms. We are monitoring, we are screening as they come in. And as a learner comes onto the campus and has completed their screening process, they then go to their register classroom, one of the new 14 register classes that we have. And there are 14 teachers sitting there in those classrooms waiting for them. And the learners arrive between 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the morning. It takes us about an hour, just under an hour, to bring in 210 matrics. It gets quicker as you go along. So they're on school from daily from Monday to Friday from roughly 7 o'clock through till, excuse me, 2:30-ish, 3 o'clock. And then on Fridays, we close at 12:30. And then we get the full notional time at school. So that's what we're doing at the moment. And it is working extremely well. And I'll show you what the timetable looks like towards the end of the presentation. We are preparing to bring in this 2 grades per day. And that is, if you can change the slide there, Vishal. There we go. So if we get 2 grades per day, we will then have 40% of our learners on campus. Now that is where we are focusing at the moment. We are heading towards the grade 10s and 11s coming in. So if what I've done, you can see the matric previous slide has just been minimized now to a smaller section. So that's grade 12s are here daily. When the grade 11s and 10s come in, they will also split into 14 register classes per grade. We're fortunate to have enough classes to be able to do that. And they will then come to school on alternate days over a 10-day cycle. So the grade 11s will be at school for 5 days out of 10, and the grade 10s will be at school 5 days out of 10. And if you look, bullet point number 3 there under the grade 11s, the 11s will be there on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then the following week, Tuesday and Thursday, and the grade 10s will come to school on Tuesday and Thursday in the first week, and then on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of the second week. And then it will just continue in that fashion. So on any given day, we will have the grade 12s here at school, and then the grade 11 grouping coming in on Monday. And then the next day, we'll stick with the grade 12s. They are the bankers there. They'll stay every day. And then the grade 10s come in on the Tuesday morning. And we just keep on doing that. So you will see that the notional time for the grade 10s and 11s will be 50% of their time is at school, and they'll have 1 day on, 1 day off, which means that 50% of the time they'll be doing distance learning. To be honest, we won't be presenting lessons when they're at home. They'll just be doing work which we would have set them on the day that they were at school. They would then do that work at home on the day that they're off, and then when they return to school on the alternate day, they will bring whatever work was set by a teacher. So that brings us to the scenario which pretty much will take us to the end of July, before early in August, when the grade 8s and 9s come on. So that's a very easy model. Then if we bring 3 grades, thanks Rochelle, 3 grades per day, we will have 60% of our learners on campus. We have about 1,100 learners in total, and so we'll have about 60% of them on campus if we bring 3 grades in on a day. Hopefully by then lockdown regulations might have been eased a little bit, and we will maybe allowed to have more than 50% of our learners at school. I just need to say that with 2 grades a day on the campus, we are able to have different breaks, staggered bell times. We are able to have 1 grade out the front of the school where they will have break, and then the other grade goes out at a slightly different time at another break, and they will be at the back of the school. And so we are able to separate the grades quite easily when it comes to managing breaks, and therefore social distancing, movement in corridors, etc., is relatively easily managed. When we bring three grades per day, that will be in somewhere around the 3rd of August, as I recall. Again, the grade 12s will be here every day, as you can see, so I've left that the same. The grade 11s, 10s, 9s, and 8s will be split into 14 register classes, as they had been, certainly the 10s and 11s already, and the 8s and 9s will do similarly. And then they will alternate days over a 10-day cycle. So at any given time, let's give you an example. We go down to the sort of 3rd or 4th bullet point there. The grade 12s will be at school, the grade 11s will be at school, and the grade 8s will be at school on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then Tuesday and Thursday of the following week. And then the grade 10s will come into school with the 9s on the next day, and the grade 12s are already at school. We know that. And so over that time frame, the grade 8s and 9s will also be coming in on a 50% notional time. In fact, it might be slightly more, because obviously their hours are slightly different to the senior grades. So that's really the structure of how we are bringing the 11s and 10s and 8s and 9s in over the next 2 months. Now, our timetable is somewhat elegant in its simplicity, and I think that has been a focus of what we've been trying to do at Bergfleet, is to try and keep things simple. Behind the scenes, behind the timetable that you see on your screen right now, it does get a little bit more complicated, but in its structure, it is simple. So let me give you an example. Let me explain how it works. Forget the register time. They're coming in from 7, 7:15 in the morning. We start the first lesson in grade at just after 8 o'clock. So what happens is the following. All these learners are in register classes. So they're now split, those 7 register classes have now been split into 14. Let's just take 1 register class. So register class 12A, for example, will be split into 2 classrooms of 15. And in our school, the English teachers teach a full register class, and our Afrikaans teachers teach a full register class. So what happens is, in period 1, let's say I'm the English teacher, I will teach English to 12A, 15 of them in classroom 1, And the Afrikaans teacher who teaches 12A Afrikaans will teach 15 learners in 12A Afrikaans in classroom 2. At the end of that period, which you can see is 54 minutes, literally the two teachers just walk next door and they deliver exactly the same lesson to the 15 learners that were sitting in the other class. So I now move to classroom 2 and I teach English to the 15 12A learners that were sitting in classroom 2. And the Afrikaans teacher moves to the classroom that I was in and teaches Afrikaans to the 15 learners that had just received English. And so we literally can teach English and Afrikaans to the whole group by maintaining social distancing. And it works like that. If you take that for one class, you can do that for all 14 or 7 registered classes, which are now divided into 14. I hope I'm not going too quickly, but it is quite simple. Then we have break time, and what we do is we've got, let's say, 210 matrics, 105 of them go and do life orientation. They don't have a break. They go to life orientation, where they are split between the 3 life orientation teachers. We have 30 in a class, roughly, and they are in bigger venues than a normal classroom. We've got 4 or 5 venues that can hold 30 learners or more, and we then, with full social distancing, and so they get taught LO. That means I've only got 105 learners out at break time, which are easy to manage. I have a duty staff that goes there. After break, the learners return to class, and they then we have combined maths and maths literacy against what we call our elective 3. These are our core subjects like geography, history, visual art, etc. And we've divided them into 3 groupings. And so what happens is the maths teachers and those teachers that teach elective 3s will do exactly the same as the English Afrikaans. So if in period 3 I was a geography teacher, I would be teaching geography in elective 3 to 15 or so learners, whereas the other learners in the class will be taught maths literacy, maths or maths literacy. Then at the end of that lesson, the learners will then move. The teachers don't move in this case, because now obviously the learners are going to move to elective and specialist classes. And so the learners move in a 5 learners per minute, literally, are moved out of the classroom. And then I get a second batch of geography learners who come to my class, and I teach them geography. And the learners that I taught geography, or if the teachers are teaching them history or whatever, they move back to maths. And that is very elegant as well, and it works tremendously. Obviously, what you've got to do there is you've got to make sure that you know who is taking maths, who is taking what subjects, and then make sure that you've got the right numbers in each class. That's where it gets a bit more complicated behind the scenes. Then we go into break, and we have LO again for the second batch of learners who had break in the first lot, and we do that again. And then elective 1 and 2, we counter, as you see on the screen there. Friday, exactly the same, except slightly different bell times. If I can move on to the final slide then and wrap up my presentation. This would be the grade 10s and 11s. They would come in 2 weeks' time. And you will see, if you just compare the 2 slides, I'm not going to be easy now, but you could, I'm sure that these slides will be made available to you. You would then see that we are teaching when English and Afrikaans is being taught by the English and Afrikaans teachers. We can't have them teaching English and Afrikaans in grade 11 and 10 at the same time. And so they are moved to the latter part of the day in periods 5 and 6, and maths literacy is split over periods 1 and 2, and electives over a break time. And you can see that the breaks are combined and are at different times. So this is what the grade 11s would do on Monday through to Thursday, and then on Friday, and then the grade 10s would come and follow exactly the same timetable, exactly the same structure. You don't have to change it. You're just changing the teachers and you're changing the learners on every alternate day. So it's very efficient and it works a treat. Certainly the matric one has worked, and there's no reason that the graded 11 and 10 one hasn't done. We haven't gone, and then the grade 8s and 9s will have a slightly different timetable, and that we haven't produced yet. So we'll get that over the next month. We will work that out. So that is, in a nutshell, my presentation. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity, and I hope if there are questions, we'll manage those questions in a little while. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Ladies and gentlemen, very quickly now, we are going to move to Anand. I want to thank Stephen for his presentation. We will have questions a little later. Remember, there is the Q&A there, but I need to just also reassure you that you will get the presentation. Everybody who is on the webinar will get the presentation. We have a recording as well, which we will send out to everybody who wants it. I need to indicate that after Anand's presentation, we will have a Q&A, sorry, we will have a poll. And it's online, so you can just, it's a tick box thing, which you can just do. It gives us an indication of how things are going and exactly where your concerns are lying. So without further ado, let me call on Anand to make his presentation. Thank you, Anand.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel. Good afternoon to our national and provincial leadership of NAPTOSA, my co-presenters and teachers. As a preamble, may I declare that as school managers and teachers, we are in survival mode. Firstly, surviving the impact of this contagion, and secondly, reinventing the structure of the academic day to deliver the curriculum under extraordinary circumstances. I will by no means question your integrity of reading the documents of re-engineering schooling and guidelines on timetabling, but rather highlight a model or combination of models that may suit your particular school. As we move on to the next slide, the document speaks to 50% or less of the learner populace attending school on any one day to manage the hygiene protocols and social distancing. You will see through my discourse that the environment that Stephen has painted is very different to the one that I'm going to be presenting to you. And the reduced class size to allow for social distancing of 1 meter as enshrined in the document. This is when a learner is seated a distance between the upper orifice of the learners in terms of the point of entry of the virus. Now, the mandatory use of the masks the whole day, which has proven rather challenging for our children in just 8 days of schooling that are. School day at Northbury Park begins with the early arrival of managers to start the daily screening. Now, this takes a lot of time because the temperatures drop very low, and on Monday it recorded outside was just 10 degrees, and even the scanners did not work appropriately. Then we had to shift. So straight away, you see the challenges that occur. So by the time we get the staggered arrival of learners due to the new loading regulations in the public transport system, example, our minibuses and the private transport, and further to add a departure from the conventional order of things, the new models of teaching. Now, may I elaborate on the models of teaching that is on the screen? The first one is the platoon model, which alludes to part of the school arriving in the morning session and the other half arriving in the afternoon. This will prove very challenging for children in the afternoon whose attention span may be limited when subjects like mathematics and physical science is taught later in the day. And without even thinking about the impact of the psychosocial challenges that our learners will experience when they reach home at maybe 12:30. And of course, the teacher's workload is almost doubled, and learners will be home in the middle of the day and others very late in the afternoon, a cause for serious concern. The next model, which is alternate days. Firstly, the grade 12 learners are fixed. They attend school daily, irrespective of what model is chosen, as this is their exit year, and there is no change in their notional time. Learners of certain grades will attend school according to the alternate days on either Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and another grade on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Now, this will alternate in the second week with the group which had 2 days now attending school for 3 days, and vice versa. The bi-weekly rotational. This school of thought will have 2 or 3 grades attend school in week 1 and alternate in the second week with another 2 or 3 grades depending on the infrastructure of the school, knowing that grade 12s will be constant in all those weeks. And obviously, you get the other system whereby there is no change to the traditional academic day because of just a limited number of learners per class and just a small number attend school in those schools. Moving over to the next slide, we now talk a little more in expansive nature about the bi-weekly model. Now, my school, which is situated in Pietermaritzburg, and it has a learner populace of 990. And we are proposing to go with the bi-weekly model. So let's see how it unpacks. Firstly, the grade 12 and 1 or 2 other grades on week 1, and grade 12 or 1 or 2 other grades in the second week, which is dependent on the numerical logistics of the school. Now, if we take our particular vicinity, so it's going to be in week 1, the grade 12s, and then the grade 11s. Now, currently with the grade 12s, with all the splits that occur with regard to the timetable, we are using 11 classrooms, and yet we have just 140 learners. Now, when we look at the timetable remains constant in the bi-weekly model for week 1 and week 3 and week 2 and week 4. So this scenario will completely change come August 3rd when the grade 8 and grade 9 cohort return. Our challenge will be to retain the 50% or less learners in school on any one day. Now, at the moment, when we look at the arrival of the cohort with the grade 8 to 9, we will surpass the 50% and we will run into a lot of challenges. Now, with the weekly rotation, parents will ensure that their transport arrangements are concluded for the entire week for 5 days. Learners will have continuity in their application to tasks when they are there for the entire week, and so forth with the week that is now going to be coming in the second stream. Teachers now will be able to prepare adequately for the entire week, and the constraints with regard to the notional hours and the time that is given will have to be worked out with regard to the numerical logistics of each school, which will be particular in terms of the number of learners you have in each of those grades. Now, what happens to the learners who do not pitch up on the first week? Now, this is what we are engaging in currently. We're engaging in a teaching pack containing study material and non-designated and designated tasks to be compiled for each learner for the grades alternating. Now, education is a societal issue, and we look towards both the schooling community, and much is asked of our parents because their supervision of work of the learners when they are not at school. Because when they are not at school, a clear instruction is given in terms of the teaching pack as to what needs to be done on Monday, Tuesday, and going through to Friday. Now, when I speak about the school community, this is where schools need to explore the online support of gadgetry. And here I speak of online platforms like the D6. Now, the D6 platform may help a lot in terms of the app with regard to study material being given to our learners, and it may ensure that it facilitates learning at home. And moving on to the next slide, we look at the challenges that comes with this model. Now, already you will understand that in terms of your school, what you experience. And the biggest of all is going to be the human resource. And our problem gets exacerbated when it comes to the cohort of the grade 8 and 9 learners come the 3rd of August. There will be a shortage of teachers to teach classes with bigger numbers. How are we going to overcome that? We are hoping that there will be some reprieve by DBE in terms of how we manage that, because we will see our learners less frequently and it will distort the notional time. I studied aspects of the trimmed curriculum. We will need to really put our minds together to ensure that quality learning takes place. Now, teachers are anxious. They are planners, and they are so fixed in terms of understanding their curricula and the teaching weeks and how they are able to ensure that the assessment is done in accordance with time. Then we have teachers now who have applied for the core mobilities concession. And school managers are hopeful that the Department of Education will ensure that those teachers reach the schools on time. We anticipate that to be done very, very soon. And of course, we have teacher burnout. This is the influenza season, and teachers take a lot of sick leave during this time. Already, teachers planning, being anxious, and due to relief teaching, it really puts a lot of stress onto the teaching fraternity. And thereafter, we have the closure of schools that may occur due to COVID-19 infection. Now, the legal protocols all need to be followed, but in the event of there being that incidence, it's going to affect and further retard the process. And to me, the last of the challenges, which is not captured there, is the NSNP. For schools that rely on the NSNP for their nourishment, it's going to be challenging because they will only receive those nourishing meals every alternate week. And moving over to the next slide, in this bi-weekly model, let's look at the preparation phase. In 2 weeks, the school receives the next cohort of learners. So teachers are busy right now to honor all subjects and study the revised ATPs and notional time, and no subject is to be left behind. We start vigorously preparing the teaching packs for all grades and ensure that they are congruent to the teaching weeks available and the new calendar. We will determine by now our human resource, knowing that we have that X amount of teachers. And in my school, this is what we have done. Teachers that have the ability to teach the subject, and you may not be teaching this year. And because of the number of classes, the upper management is going to be teaching a lot more so that we can alleviate the plight of the level 1 teachers. In terms of infrastructure, to ensure that we manage social distancing, a lot of classrooms have really changed in terms of their outlook. But DOE must provide substitute teachers. And in conclusion, in the final slide, you may not be limited to the choice of the model. You may choose a combination of models. An evaluation team must be in place to monitor attendance, transport challenges, NSNP implications on a weekly basis and report. Be prepared for the stop and start syndrome. Maybe more than one approach may be feasible to overcome NSNP constraints. The notional time per subject will be compromised in the majority of schools. We are treading uncharted waters, so planning is essential. So let us have courage to change the things we can, humility when things do not work, and wisdom to be the glue to see us through. Let us all have the right attitude to reach our altitude and aspire to inspire. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Anand. Ladies and gentlemen, those were our 2 presentations, and you can see that the challenges are different. You can see that there are solutions, and of course you can see the complication that comes in with the type of subject combinations you have, where it is simply assumed you can split your classes, but classes are being split on their own because of these subject combinations that you would have, and you would need many more classes. So a report that says, oh, we don't think there will be a big problem with everybody being back is actually oversimplifying it. Now I'm going to invite Therona and David, who are going to fire some questions that you have asked on the Q&A group, as well as the many, many questions that have been sent in. Therona, over to you.
Thank you, Basil. I think our presenters have been so clear that I've just got one question that has come through from C. Hopkins, and that is, what do you suggest the school can do if they do not have the capacity for 14 registered classes? I see Stephen has responded on the Q&A. However, he has said he'll take a minute or 2 to briefly explain that. So can I ask Stephen to please just respond to that question verbally, as he's done on the question and answer facility.
Right. Yes, thanks, Therona. Folks, we have 200 learners, 210 learners in our matric class. That's 7 classes of 30. So for us, we have the facility to have 14 rooms, separate rooms, so we could divide them into 2 classes of 15. However, if I didn't have that, then I would have to juggle that class differently. For example, I've got now 200 in the grade. Let's just say I now have only got 8 classes available to me. Then I have to put 25 into those classrooms. And then I have to come up with another plan as to how they are going to be taught. If you've got 10 classes available, you can divide that group into 20 learners per group. Try and use venues where they can only take 20. If you've got venues like halls or maybe some specialist classrooms, slightly bigger classrooms than normal, then use those for combining classes. So some classes might have a full register class of 30 in there or 30 or 35 in there, whereas other classes have slightly less numbers in them. So from my side of it, it's a case of saying, how many classrooms have I got available? In my case, we have enough classrooms. I think it's 44 classrooms to bring 3 grades in and to have 15 per class. We're fortunate to have 44 classrooms to be able to do that. So that's how we are managing it. If I've got less teachers coming in because of structures, of course they have been staying at home, they have to stay at home through comorbidities or isolation, then we will have to juggle those classes. We might have to say our registered classes are now 20 per class or bigger, and merge classes as we're going along. So, it is really how long is a piece of string in your school. Thank you very much.
Verona, are there any other questions?
No, Basil, that was just the one question.
Okay, David, can I go to you? David has a whole bank of questions. Many were sent in. Many may have been answered now, but David, over to you.
Thanks very much, Basil. Yeah, most of them have been answered. Excellent questions, and both presentations have covered many of them, but there are some unique questions here. This one from the Eastern Cape to Steve. How can SMTs, or how does your SMT ensure social distancing is observed when other grades are being phased in?
All right. I can set. Oh, am I on there, Richard?
We can hear you, Steve.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay. Folks, again, my SMT, we have duty staff out on the fields at break times. All my teachers step outside their classrooms when there is a movement required of learners in corridors. We also have a staggering of lesson and break time. So, for example, the grade 11s, or let's say the grade 10s, sorry, the grade 12s are starting at 8 o'clock. Then in their first period, then what we do is we start the grade 11s and the grade 10s at 5 past or 10 past 8, which means that when the periods end, we don't have any bells in the school. So we'll just operate on a bell-less system, and then we'll just release the classes 10 minutes sort of after the other group has moved. We manage social distancing in the corridors. By having the staggered breaks, and by having, in our case, the LO at break times, we then minimize the number of learners at break times. We have big fields, so it allows the learners to spread across the fields relatively easily. So duty staff, staggering lesson times, staggering break times, control movement of learners in the corridors and out of classrooms. For example, we have 15 in a class, so we let the learners out of a class to go to break or to go to another venue 5 at a time. We wait a minute, and then we let another 5 at a time, and then another minute, and then the last 5. That allows us to get this little wave, 3 little waves of learners moving through the corridors. So it works quite nicely that way. So that's how you can ensure social distancing.
Thanks, Steve. There's a question here on social distancing at break from Gauteng. How do you make sure that the children socially distance at break? Do you have more teachers on duty at break for those limited numbers?
We have, we worked on a 1 in 20 ratio of learners, staff to learners. What we do is we've marked, if we have stands and places where learners can sit, we have marked them with red duct tape, which indicates where you can sit or stand. And then on the fields themselves, what we have done is we've scattered the rugby and hockey cones that you do for hockey and rugby practicing and things like that. We've taken these cones and marked them across the field in in little groups of 4 and 3 and 5, and learners stand roughly in the vicinity of those, roughly in the visit. Oh, what the hell has happened here?
Can you hear you, Steve?
Stephen?
Oh, you can. Sorry, something. My whole screen has just gone blank. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So basically, we then put these things all over the field, these little cones, and learners will stand in the vicinity of those cones in some sort of way. So we manage it by putting markers out on the fields and on the stands.
And then an important question about grade 8 and 9 coming from KZN, talking about all the subjects. Will all subjects be accommodated on your timetable? You spoke about the model that you've still got to do a timetable for 8s and 9s, but having spoken to your SMT and your staff, will all subjects be covered on the new timetable, considering you can only squeeze in a certain number of periods per grade?
Yes, we can. If we reduce our lessons to sort of half-an-hour slots, we can get in all the subjects that we need to on any given day. However, if the teachers feel that that is going to be too pressured and they're having too short a time, we will then run those lessons. So we'll do six subjects on one day, and then 6 or 7 on the other day that they come in. So, you know, the grade 8s and 9s, they have a slightly different notional time, so that is possible to do. There's also a discussion of whether one would continue to teach LO, because that could be done sort of digitally and online. And the other one is creative arts, how we manage whether we're actually going to have a class for creative arts, because dance and music and we are doing it in a slightly different way. So we don't need to actually have classes for creative arts. We can do that online too. So it really depends on what your school is able to do and what able to fit in. In our case, we can fit in most subjects for grade 8s and 9s on a given day.
Thanks very much.
David, can I just interrupt?
Anand now. Yes.
Let's give Anand an opportunity, and then Therona has a whole bank of new questions that have been asked now on the group. So we'll go back to her, but let's give Anand an opportunity.
All right, thanks, Basil. I'll do that. I was moving to Anand now. Anand, you spoke about a reprieve, quote unquote, and shortage of teachers. So the one question comes from the Northwest Province, and it says, rotation timetables will not be able to meet the notional times. How do we overcome this, since platooning is not an option? Will the DBE pay for additional educators? Not an easy question, but over to you, Anand.
My guess is as good as mine. Your guess is as good as mine when it comes to that. Yes, platooning in certain schools is going to have all its necessary evils related to it. But there is no other way out in terms of the notional times being reduced. If we consider the trimming of the curriculum, and we've understood that when a curriculum is trimmed, then obviously it necessitates that the assessment is not linked to that. So the notional time is going to be something that has to be presented, properly planned, constructed, and adequate substantiation as to how the notional time is going to be reduced. This will have to be presented perhaps to circuit managers so that the DOE can speak to this. If we leave it just to schools, then we're going to have SMTs now taking the initiative on their own to actually reduce the notional times as per subject. Now, there's something that
Okay, your screen is frozen there, Anand.
Are you with me?
Back with you, yeah. Continue.
Yeah. As I say, there's one suggestion that I would make. Look at the continuity in terms of the curriculum flowing from one grade to the next. Remember, our grade 11s and our grade 9s in a high school are very, very critical. Grade 11s into grade 12 and grade 9s that are actually choosing a career, and their career pathing will depend on certain subjects. And to ensure that there's continuity, So when you look at those subjects, ensure that you don't compromise on that, and that will dictate to the notional time. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Basil, time for one more question?
No, David. Let's go to Therona for one more, and then
Fine.
we've got to go to Marion, and we will build in some time at the end.
Good. Thanks, Basil.
Therona, to you.
Thank you, Basil. I will just put through 2 or 3 questions. One, I think I'll leave at the end for you to respond to. The one comes from Ms. Hariram, and she asks, in light of these models, do you see the need for DBE/Umalusi to possibly consider reviewing, trimming the examination papers that have been set and the grade 12 curriculum accordingly? I'll go to the second question. How many of your educators teach multiple subjects? That's from Kerry McKillen. And finally, I just want to end with more of a comment that, Basil, you may want to come in on a little bit later after the questions have been responded to. And this comes from, I don't see it here now. I think it's been responded to. Let me finally ask one more. What if a teacher teaches a language and LO, and there's not enough teachers to teach the matrics, example, math, physics, science? Our normal class size is divided into 3, and one teacher must rotate between 3 classes in a period. Any solution to this problem? That comes from Kobe Liebenberg. Thank you. I'll stop there. There are several more questions here, but in the interest of time, can we get responses to those? And we could then move on.
Therona, just the first question again, please.
The first question was, in light of these models, do you see a need for DBE/Umalusi to possibly consider reviewing, trimming the examination papers that have been set and the grade 12 curriculum accordingly?
Right now, my teachers inform me that we are ahead of the curriculum. They are well ahead. The learners have been receiving the lessons during lockdown. Obviously, schools who haven't got access to that are going to have to consider how they're going to put in a revision program or a catch-up program. And that's going to be a challenge. I do, however, think with the fact that the mid-year exams have been removed, I do feel that there's still time for the matrics to get through their syllabus. The final year, the end of the year exams have been pushed back slightly. So if teachers get on with it and get themselves sorted out and move through, especially with smaller classes, you find that you get through the work a little bit quicker. So I don't think there's a necessity to change this, to reduce the examination at the end of the year.
Thank you. Anand, would you like to attempt to give a shot at one of those questions?
Yes, I looked at question 2 and 3, perhaps could be actually answered by me directly in terms of the educators teaching multiple subjects. When it comes to educators teaching across 3 subjects, I guess the starting point of that would be your cohort, your entire cohort of the mastery of the subjects. And I guess you need to pool again in terms of understanding what you have at your school. Now, I know exactly where this type of question arises from, because here is a teacher now that may be deployed to teach more than 4 lessons in a day, whereas another may only be teaching just 1 lesson, depending on the model. This is where I would say to schools where they have teachers teaching multiple subjects, approach the SMT, and before that, approach your department head to understand the dynamics, clearly articulate what the challenges are, and see a way forth in terms of how you're going to anticipate others assisting. I've given you a scenario in my school whereby the upper management are doing much more to alleviate the plight of level 1 teachers by taking on subjects when teachers are having difficulty in it. Thank you.
Verona,
Thanks,
thank you
Anand.
very much. And Anand, thank you. Stephen, thank you very much for this input. You're not yet released or anything, because we may have time at the end to bring in a few more questions. Thank you, David. Ladies and gentlemen, just for background purposes, before we invite Marion to come on, let me just add one or two things. We've raised the issue about the examinations, simply because the vast majority of the schools have not managed to teach during lockdown time. We've had all sorts of creative ways of people teaching, even via WhatsApp. However, we are balancing the credibility issue with Umalusi now. And the debate is not about whether to change the examination, it's whether it will compromise the credibility. And that is the big issue. Insofar as the issues that Anand raised about teachers with comorbidities, crazily enough, at this moment, the ELRC is in session, and we are talking about how we replace teachers with comorbidities, because that is going to impact on some schools more than on others. I have a high school that sent me a message earlier last week. They have 10 teachers that are genuinely away. And of course, when the other cohort of children come in, they won't be able to deal with the curriculum. Insofar as notional times are concerned, ladies and gentlemen, you've got to accept that things are different, that there will be some changes. You cannot expect to do exactly what you did when we had no interruption. And remember that only your matrics are a fixture. All the others will rotate, and you're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul. Now, there's a document that we will put on our website called the Guidelines for the Development of School Timetables. And one of the things that it makes very clear, particularly as it affects grade 8s and grade 9s and grade 10s, is that there are core subjects that you can't compromise on, whilst there are subjects that you can steal time from. But it all depends on the teachers and having the teachers to actually execute that. And lastly, of course, I use a phrase often that says, we are the masters of the curriculum. We can decide that. And the current curriculum that is sent out did not assume that you will be in the situation you are in now. Secondly, we are also the masters of assessment. And Marion is going to come up in a second and talk to us about that. But I want to say to you that there are going to be more changes than the Department of Education could ever have envisaged. And you are, in your schools, are going to be managing much more than you thought you're going to manage. So hold on to your seats. Let me invite Marion to put on her screen and her microphone, and let us hand over to Marion. We can't separate assessments from the timetable. Marion, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. May I express my profound admiration for the commitment and dedication that the members of the teaching profession are showing at this time. I cannot fully grasp the kinds of anxiety that many must be feeling as they prepare to take on some of the challenges that have been discussed this afternoon. Today, when I talk about assessment, I'm going to be drawing on several documents regarding curriculum and assessment, because I don't know that we can talk about assessment without talking about curriculum. The first one is called the School Recovery Plan document. The first draft of this document came out in April, and we discussed it as part of the National Curriculum and Assessment Task Team. And that document has had to be revised, and I think we're going to be talking about revisions quite a lot over the next few months, because I think there are so many variables and uncertainties that lie ahead. We talk about a new normal, which perhaps is a new abnormal that we need to expect. So that's the first document that I've drawn on for the input for this presentation. Obviously, I've looked at the revised school calendar. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about a draft document. And I need to emphasize that it is a draft document at this stage. It's a national assessment circular for the GET band. And obviously that will pertain to your grade 8s and your grade 9s. Rochelle, can we go to the next slide, please? So let's talk about grade 12s. And Basil has already touched on some of the things I want to talk about. So in terms of the trimming and reorganization, none of that has happened with the grade 12 curriculum. And obviously that's linked to the fact that this is an exit certificate, the National Senior Certificate, and there are quality assurance issues that, you know, pertain to the processes with Umalusi. And so when we were told that there would be no trimming, when we had our first meeting in April, this is the justification that was given. However, since then, there has been a union submission to the Department of Basic Education. And whilst we've acknowledged the efforts that they've been to provide platforms for continued learning for all grades during the lockdown, many learners have not been able to access these platforms. And so we question the sort of ignoring of socioeconomic realities that we have in our context. You know, how many people cannot afford electricity? How many have the data and the devices to access platforms? All those sorts of questions have been tabled. And then, of course, there's been the uneven reopening of schools. Some schools have already had to close. And there will be continued disruptions like this. And we would certainly urge schools to have plans, thoughts on what their fallback strategies are going to be. So what's the plan with the prelims is basically there's the proposal that these happen in term 3. If you looked at the revised school timetable, you'll see term 2 ends in that first week of August, and then you have that long weekend linked to Women's Day, and then term 3 begins. And the preparatory examinations will probably take place quite soon after the start of term 3. However, instead of 5 weeks being allocated for the prelims, there will only be 3 weeks. And the use of provincially set papers will be reduced only to your critical subjects. So the provincial timetable will only be for these subjects. The rest will be conducted by schools. And if schools find that they do need more time, the DB is saying you will have to extend your school day. Not a happy prospect, but that seems to be perhaps an oversimplified solution that they offer to that possible problem. And then your concessions on the number of SBA tasks may be affected depending on the number of actual teaching days remaining. Now, there was a teacher development and curriculum management committee meeting this morning. And when one looks at the summary of the reduction or the trimming of curriculum and the reduction of assessment tasks in the FET subject, there's virtually nothing. There's virtually no reduction. And if there is, it's perhaps by 1 assessment task. Very rarely is there a reduction of 2. So I think there's going to be immense pressure on your FET teachers. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, your orals and practical examinations for relevant subjects may be reviewed. So I think if you look at the languages, you will see that some of the oral assessments have been removed. The final examination timetable will be reviewed, and it will be aligned to available teaching time. And as we expect the school year to continue until the 15th of December, the proposed start of the NSC exams will be the 26th of October. I presume we will get some kind of official notification soon. And then, of course, there are no June examinations that will be written. I think everybody knows that because the minister did announce it quite early. Can we have the next slide, please? Just one final remark about grade 12s. I've spoken to some of the grade 12 teachers I know, and they have said that what we've got is doable, but only if teachers are very disciplined and very well organized. But they do acknowledge that there will be immense time pressures. Your grade 10s and 11s will come back on the 6th of July. There has been some, but not much trimming of the curriculum, really very little. And well, the general feedback we've had from teachers is that it's satisfactory, but they're not happy with what they see in the mathematics curriculum. Very small reductions in school-based assessment, but there has been, from apparently the teams who worked on the reductions, an encouragement to focus mainly on assessing thinking skills necessary for learning and assessment requirements for grade 12. Next slide, please. Then your grades 8s and 9s are expected to return on the 3rd of August, which means they will virtually have no second term, because your second term ends, I think, on the 7th of August. There is some trimming of the curriculum in some subjects more than in others. I'm certainly very unhappy with the quality of the trimming in the language document, and teachers I've consulted about this are also very unhappy about it. Considering that you have only 2 terms, yes, the 3rd term is quite a long term, but nevertheless, one of the things that seems to have been absent in the thinking of the subject committees is that when schools reopen, it will not be the school that closed in March. There will be a very new normal. I mean, there's been mention made of the time that it takes to do the screening and the admittance of children to school when they arrive. And this has been a great concern of ours as members of the task team, is that lack of acknowledgement that there will be important, significant differences that will reduce teaching time, and this doesn't seem to have been factored into the thinking of the teams that did the trimming and reorganization. The draft assessment circular for grades 8 to 9 that was tabled at the NEAC meeting last week, we have questions about its alignment to the revised ATPs, because whilst the ATPs have included the assessment tasks, we now have this new document that indicates what seems to be not entirely the same requirements. Can we go to the next slide, please? What they've proposed for grades 8 and 9 is that there will be an exam for only the languages and mathematics, and there will be a standardized test for all the other subjects. The exam, the only thing I can see as being different between an exam and a standardized test is that the exam will be based on the work done in term 1, 2, and 3, whereas the standardized test will be done on work done in terms 3 and 4, but both will have to be written under controlled exam conditions. Now, do indicate there that you need to know these are in a draft document. Unions have submitted questions and concerns about this document, and we will hopefully receive the response to our questions and concerns in the not too distant future. So very simply, those are the assessment requirements that seem to be what will be introduced over the next 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. Let me first go to Therona. Therona, are there any questions that have been asked specifically to Marion? And let's field those, and David, then you will come on, and then of course we can do a couple of other questions, and there are 1 or 2 things that I would just like to alert people to before we get to the end of our session. Therona, over to you.
Thanks, Basil. No, there's nothing specific to Marion, and most of the questions have been answered online by Stephen and the team. So right now there's no unanswered questions relating to assessment. Okay,
David, and your webinar questions.
Yeah, let me look at the one question which links up really nicely to what Marion's been saying, Basil. And maybe Anand can answer this question for me, or for the listeners. How did you catch up the SBA for matrics, Anand? Or how do you intend catching up the SBA for matrics? The question comes from KwaZulu-Natal. Was it done as part of asynchronous learning, the blended learning? So that's what the person wants to know.
Okay, when it comes to a situation in my particular school, to answer that, is that without the D6 and without gadgetry, which Stephen had alluded to, it became rather impractical to have any connection with the grade 12 learner during the time of the lockdown. So as a result, they are at a disadvantage compared to learners that were in a school in Western Cape. So when it comes to the challenges regarding that, when the learners returned on the 8th of June, we began to redress, firstly, the shortcomings of term 1, and then went on to induct our children. Now that takes time. It was disappointing for a lot of learners and teachers that we found that there is hardly any trimming. And we understand when Mr. Manuel alluded to the credibility of the examination as a whole in terms of Umalusi. But this is where the challenges occur. It brings about the inequalities, and if we go there now, then we will be talking for the whole afternoon. But as a result, this is the challenge faced by many teachers and many assessment planners in their schools.
Thanks very much. And then Basil, there's one more question on assessment that's linked to catching up time and timetable. I think I'm going to ask Stephen this question. Stephen, when you worked on a timetable, did you take into account that you were recovering lost time? What's your timetable model based on recovering lost time?
David, what we have done is we have catch-up classes after school. We haven't seen a huge need to recover lost time because we have managed to connect with the vast majority of our learners. And those learners who had issues with data, we had parents who donated money. We have given out food parcels, etc., to learners who were unable to access. We got phones donated, old phones that were from parents where they were lying around in a drawer. and we managed to get these to learners and provide them with data. So, to be honest, when we got back to school, our catch-up work was minimal. We have put in sort of catch-up classes in the afternoon session after school for those learners who feel that they were a little bit behind, and we've identified those and they are doing those afternoon classes.
Super, thank you. Basil, that's
Thanks,
all from the questions.
Thanks, David. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just run through one or two small little things with you before we reach the end, and just hold on to your chairs. So we start the examinations on the 26th of October for the matriculates. And then, of course, marking will commence on the 5th of December and will end on the 23rd of December. Now, of course, there are two sets of exams. The NSC and the senior certificate exams are being written at the same time. For those of you who are not sure of the jargon, we are talking about that which would have been the June exam and that which would have been the December exam being written in one. I haven't seen whether it's one examination question paper, because normally there would be two different ones. And remember that the complexity in terms of managing this, because of the sheer number of matriculants. Normally we have about 600,000 people writing, or 650,000, and now we have over 1 million. And that means that some of your schools will be closing earlier than what our calendar suggests, because in a lot of schools they don't have halls, there are no community centers, they've got to use the classrooms. So already there is going to be a shortening yet again of the school year. In terms of the questions that have been raised about the matric examination, or rather the matric syllabus and the trimming or the non-trimming, we've had meetings with various university folk as well as other experts, and we've looked at what the international scenario has been. The reality is that every country has the same issue in terms of the credibility of its exit exam. And every country has trimmed it. And we have asked the Umalusi in particular, who is the quality assurer, because it is they or them who determine whether any trimming will impact on the credibility, because there is a serious, serious problem. Ladies and gentlemen, whilst we've had many schools, and we must learn from the schools that have been able to do online lessons, because there is a fear that we may have to go back to that mode even before the end of this year, depending on how the peak of the virus goes. What do we do then? Think of the possible disruption to the matric examination if a child within the exam or a teacher tests positive in a group that has already started writing. There are so many unknowns, and these are the things that we are trying to cover at the moment. Results will be released only on the 26th of January. 26th of January, and the schools will release it on the 27th of January, because all the processes that happen after the completion of marking to the release of results will only happen in January. Now, I'm still unhappy with this, because there is nothing that suggests we should have such a long delay. We've only delayed the start of the matric exam by 1 week. Yes, the sheer number has increased. It's a much longer time to mark, and we're marking 2 separate exams. So why the long delay for all the standardization meetings, etc., is beyond me at the moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that there are a lot of unknowns. Insofar as the choices you make, and I'm going to ask Richard to put up the poll results in a minute, you will see that the vast majority of our schools have said they're not even contemplating the whole issue of platooning, simply because whilst it sounds like an easy model, it is a model for burnout. It is also a model of absenteeism, where more people will stay absent simply because they are tired and burnt out. And yet, it would have been good if it could work. Insofar as SASAMs and those things are concerned, and I know our Western Cape colleagues don't use SASAMs, but the rest of the country does, it is being trimmed or rather remodeled to ensure that whatever happens between grade 8 and grade 11 can still be captured there. But in the final analysis, the model you choose is going to have to work for you. Even that first day, that fateful day of the 6th. Now, I must tell you, I did a little undercover poll at some of the private schools that had brought in additional grades. And many of them who spoke truthfully said to me it was a nightmare. They didn't expect the type of chaos that did result in some schools. And we know schools are very coy about saying that there was chaos. And that is why we've got to carefully manage those days when they come in, even if we've got to suspend the attendance of the matriculants on that day to manage all the other things. Schools that have halls, etc., thinking of the Western Cape where the weather could just go belly up and it could be raining torrents, etc., they may be able to manage some of this, but think of the schools that don't have. So there are a lot of unknowns, but I sincerely hope that what we've tried to do this afternoon comforts you in some way. Number one, that you're not alone in it, that there are many things which have to be clarified. So watch out for our news flashes. Number two, that if you thought you were badly off, suddenly you realize by the sheer questions that were being asked that, hey, there are people that are worse off than I am. If that is your comfort zone, good and well. And that may just be it. When it comes to assessment and the inputs Marion made, I must tell you, assessment and the curriculum is a constant fight. And NAPTOSA is the one union that makes this a major focus, because we know that it is not salaries that our teachers find punishing. The fact that we've had no salary increase, or the fact that salary increases are late, or whatever it may be. They just pick up and they carry on. But the thing that punishes our people is the curriculum, because it punishes you every day. And if it is not done properly, assessments become punitive. And that is why we spend so much time as NAPTOSA on things like that. In closing, allow me just to say to Richard, who's in the background, and you've heard me mentioning Richard and people asking Richard things. He has managed all this. But to David and Therona for the background work, and then of course to Stephen and Anand, who we put here in front of you, who are bold enough to share, and bold enough to also say there are things that are working and there are things that aren't. But more importantly, that showed you a particular context. Remember, the context that Anand is in may be very different to Stephen's context. It may be completely different to yours, but it gives you an indication of the things people are doing to make the system work. To assume that we could lose a term and everything had to go back to being normal is simply just beyond comprehension. It can't be normal. So don't panic yet. We'll send you a news flash to say panic now. But at the moment, don't panic. And let's make it work, because the best place for children, irrespective of the drama that is happening at schools, irrespective of shutdowns and sporadic incidences of people testing positive, the best place for the children is still in the school.